of his letter. Yet I knew that I was going to demand the same sort of thing when I got up enough nerve to put Seth or myself on the spot. In the meantime, changes were occurring in my trance states. For the first year, I paced the room constantly while speaking for Seth. My eyes were open, the pupils dilated and much darker than usual. In the 116th session, December of 1964, I sat down and closed my eyes for the first time. Rob wisely said nothing until the session was over. Seth told us that this was an experimental procedure and would not continue unless I gave my full consent. It seems ridiculous now that it took me 116 sessions before I'd close my eyes or stop pacing the floor. By the time this first change happened in my trance states, I'd already had my first out-of-body experience, and following Seth's instructions, I was having clairvoyant experiences during daily exercise periods. But I felt in control of these, while Seth was in control of sessions, and to me, this made a difference. I agreed to the new trance procedure, but it was still some time before it became the rule rather than the exception. The trance was a deeper one, though, and the material launched into more complicated subjects. It was also during this time that Seth started removing my glasses just before he began to speak. It would be January 1966 before the next change in my trance behavior. After having sessions for a year with my eyes closed, I suddenly began opening them again, though the trance was even deeper than before. There was quite a noticeable alteration of muscle pattern and facial gestures, an overall personality change. The expression in the eyes was not only un-Jane-like, it definitely belonged to Seth. To all intents and purposes, Seth was comfortably ensconced in my physical body. This is our current procedure also, and apparently it gives Seth a certain freedom of expression. He often looks directly at Rob, for example, and anyone else to whom he is speaking. In 1964, though, when we wrote to Dr. Osis, the trance hadn't achieved this depth, and I was just getting used to the idea of sitting down in sessions. During 1965, the Seth material constantly accumulated at our twice-weekly sessions. Early that year, Frederick Fell gave me a contact for the ESP book, and I had a deadline to meet. The idea of ESP tests still frightened me, but I felt that they were inevitable and necessary. In spring 1965, about a year after we wrote Dr. Osis, Rob wrote to Dr. Instream, not his real name, who was connected with a state university in upstate New York. Dr. Instream had been one of the nation's foremost psychologists in his earlier years, and had investigated many mediums in the past. If Seth was a secondary personality, he would know it, I thought. Again, we enclosed a few sessions with one letter. Dr. Instream wrote back, expressing interest and inviting us to attend the National Hypnosis Symposium to be held in July 1965. By now, we'd experimented with hypnosis in some age regression and reincarnational work. In these, I acted as hypnotist, with Rob as subject. We had never used hypnosis to induce a trance in Seth sessions, however, and we had no experience with hypnosis when the sessions began. Would Dr. Instream want me to go under hypnosis? I wasn't at all sure that I would consent. Now, after reading about the hypnotic testing undergone by Mrs. Eileen Garrett, the famous medium, I know I'd never stand for it myself. Self-hypnosis is something else. I use it now to give myself general good health suggestions. We were delighted at the prospect of meeting Dr. Instream, but in order to pay for the trip, including fees for symposium attendance, we would have to use our vacation money. Besides this, Rob was now working in the art department of a local greeting card company in the mornings and painting in the afternoons. So we would have to take vacation time to make the trip. It was the craziest and most vexing vacation we've ever spent. At the first lecture we attended, the speaker gave a demonstration in hypnosis. Except for ourselves and a few students, the symposium was attended by psychologists, doctors, and dentists. The lecturer was a psychologist who is well known for his work in hypnosis. Lowering his voice, he said that since most of those in the audience use hypnosis professionally, they should know what it felt like to be hypnotized themselves. So he began. Rob sat on one side of me and Dr. Instream on the other. I decided that I wasn't going to be hypnotized, but I lowered my eyes so as not to be conspicuous. When it became apparent that most of the audience had dutifully gone under, sitting there and reminding me somehow of pigeons with wings neatly folded, I looked up cautiously to see what Dr. Instream was doing. He was looking back. Rob was grinning, watching both of us. Dr. Instream was delightful. Later, we were in a Howard Johnson's restaurant in Oswego, talking with the good doctor, when I abruptly felt Seth about. We'd never had a session away from home. Nervously, I kept trying to make eye signs at Rob. Once I kicked his leg, hoping that I didn't kick the doctor's by mistake. Finally, I caught Rob's eye. He got the message and shrugged comically. I don't know how to put this, I said, but if you want to meet Seth, you can. He's around. I had no intention of having a session in a Howard Johnson's restaurant. Neither did Dr. Instream. He took us to his office and closed the door. We had a Seth session, the first in which I went in and out of trance so quickly that both Seth and I could take part in a normal conversation. After meeting Dr. Instream, Seth said, "My field is education, and my particular interest is that these seemingly paranormal abilities of human personality be understood and investigated, for they are not unnatural, but inherent. I am indeed aware of the difficulties which shall be encountered. I have said this often. I am no misty-eyed, ghostly spirit materializing in the middle of the night. I am simply an intelligent personality no longer bound by your physical laws." Seth went on to speak about the ESP tests that Dr. Instream had suggested in our earlier conversation. "I have some difficulties with Rupert's own stubborn attitude at times, but we must also take this into consideration, and so we shall. I will seriously endeavor to do what I can do within our circumstances. My cooperation can be counted upon. It goes without saying that all of this cannot happen overnight, but we shall begin. In a regular session, I will discuss what can be done. We can do much. Much we cannot do. But since we understand both the potentialities and limitations, then we can make the most of what we have." I guess we might have set some kind of a record. First I'd say something, then Dr. Instream, then Seth, then Rob, like a round robin. Seth called Dr. Instream by his first name, and the two of them sounded as if they were old cronies. I was a bit appalled. After all, Dr. Instream was a distinguished elderly gentleman. Rob took all the notes he could, scribbling furiously. Seth said, "Spontaneity must be allowed for. Then the sort of evidence with which you are concerned can be obtained. If we are overly concerned for effects, then the spontaneity disappears. The ego comes in, and we are lost." "Exactly," Dr. Instream said. "We must proceed carefully, without pushing. I'm out of my depth here, Seth.